This episode is sponsored by Smart Travel, a new podcast from NerdWallet. You know that one friend who always finds the best travel deals, picks the right cards, and somehow ends up in first class for the price of coach? How do they do that? Well, Smart Travel is like that friend, but in podcast form. They cover all things travel finance, like which travel cards earn their keep and which are just heavy, shiny metal, and planning group trips that won't ruin your budget or your friendships. So travel smarter and spend less. That's the key with help from NerdWallet. Follow Smart Travel wherever you get your podcasts. Armchair Explorer is a part of the Voyescape podcast network. Check out all of their shows from around the world at voyescape.com. This episode, we have one of my favorite travel writers, Jonathan Thompson, JT. He's a legend in the business. He writes for just about everyone and he writes beautifully. He's been to over 60 countries on all 7 continents and he really has a knack for telling a story. This one is a beaut. JT is going to take us on an adventure right to the ends of the earth. We are going to the snowy white wilderness of Antarctica, the last continent, one of the most incredible places on earth, but somewhere that very, very few people get to see. And we're going to do it in such a special way. We're going to follow in the footsteps of one of my favorite all-time explorers, Ernest Shackleton, the great polar explorer. JT, for the centenary of Ernest Shackleton's endurance expedition, JT actually went on a trip where he got to follow in the footsteps of Shackleton and do some incredible, crazy things, like camping on Antarctica itself. Now that is something truly, truly special. Not many people get to see Antarctica. Almost no one gets to spend the night there. And we're going to go with JT and do that. It's an incredible story. Get ready. But before we do, just a very quick reminder, if you like the show, if you like these stories and you want to hear more of them, please subscribe and please, if you can, leave a review. Also, feel free to get in touch at Aaron M. Writer across Twitter and Instagram, or go to armchair-explorer.com where you can find out more background information on this trip and all the other stories we tell, as well as get in touch with us directly and figure out how you can do some of these adventures yourself. But for right now, wherever you are, whether you're walking down the street with your headphones, whether you're cooking your dinner or listening in your car, for just a second, close your eyes and picture Antarctica. Dream of that pristine icy wilderness at the bottom of the earth, because that's where we're about to go.
Antarctica is always a place that has fascinated me ever since I was a little kid. I mean, I guess like a lot of children that grew up in England, I learnt about Captain Scott from a very young age, and particularly that kind of the story of almost making it to the South Pole first and just being beaten by Amundsen, and then that whole kind of journey home and the brave sacrifice of Captain Oates. I'm going out for a walk, I might be some time, and then finding the bodies and the diary entry where Scott has said, for God's sake, look after our people. You know, that kind of that brave, heroic, and ultimately tragic adventure, which just really captured my imagination from a very early age. I guess in many ways that kind of inspired me to get into adventure travel in the first place, you know. The idea of these guys from the golden age of exploration and going to places that no one had ever been before, seeing mountains that didn't have names because no one's ever climbed them and therefore never named them. And you know, that kind of that golden age of exploration was always something that I obsessed over as a kid, just sort of lying on the floor of my bedroom with my kind of legs up in the air, reading books about sailors and climbers and, you know, the way they lived and the things they ate and the way they navigated. It just really fascinated me from a boyhood start. And then Antarctica in particular had an interest for me because I had an ancestor. It was my grandfather's grandfather, whose name was Richard Thompson. And he sailed with Shackleton from England to South America on that crew. And then when they stopped in Argentina to supply for the final push down to Antarctica, various members of the crew didn't continue. My ancestor was one of them, but he was there at the very first leg. So we had that kind of, I had heard from my grandfather stories of his grandfather and how he knew Shackleton and how he had been there for a tiny little piece of this epic voyage. Even if it was the least dangerous piece, he still crossed the Atlantic with Shackleton and he personally knew him. And we had his medals, and we had his service record, and we had sort of like a grainy photo of him. That kind of gave me a personal connection, however distant to this epic story. So for me, going down to Antarctica and seeing the places where Shackleton and his crew had been, and the getting more intimately acquainted with the story, this incredible story, it almost kind of felt like getting closer to my own family history. And so it was more than just, way more than just another assignment for me.
The story of the Endurance is truly one of the great adventure stories of the ages. With both poles conquered and discovered, Shackleton's plan was to do something even bolder, even crazier, and more ambitious. Shackleton put an advert in the paper looking for volunteers to join him on the Endurance expedition to Antarctica. And it read like this: "Men wanted for hazardous journey. Small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful. Honor and recognition in case of success. Sir Ernest Shackleton." You have to love that. But what's even better, he was inundated with requests. He was inundated with applications. And in a way you can understand why. Just imagine for a second setting sail for an unknown world, a blank space on the map, the last uncharted continent. Just imagine being part of something of that history. I think that's what the spirit of the age of great polar explorers is all about.
His mission was not to reach the South Pole, because that had already been achieved by Amundsen. His mission was more audacious in terms of physicality. He was going to become the first man to cross the Antarctic from one side to the other. He was going to cross the entire continent on foot.
That is a crazy, crazy distance, a journey of roughly 1,800 miles, the equivalent of walking from Denver, Colorado, from the Rocky Mountains all the way to the New York City coast, on foot, pulling sleds, in temperatures that would make your fingers literally fall off if you didn't have a glove on. Gale force winds, blizzards, whiteouts, and they were going to walk it and be the first to truly conquer the Antarctic continent.
And unfortunately for him, it started going wrong right from the start, because he got down to the Antarctic Peninsula after crossing over from South America across the infamous Drake Passage, which is one of the roughest patches of sea on the planet. He made it to Antarctica, and then what happened down there was they got trapped in sea ice, and the sea ice essentially strangled the Endurance.
After 1,000 miles of sailing through pack ice and only a day or so from their final destination, they became stuck. They got locked into the sea ice. It closed in around them, pressing in on their ship like a vice, and they were stuck. They were unable to move. And gradually, with this sea ice, they just drifted away, unable to escape, unable to affect any kind of movement whatsoever. They were completely caught in the grasp of this ice, and they were obviously, at the time, unable to contact anyone for help. They were truly on their own, and for 10 months they drifted like that. And then it got worse. The ice slowly crushed them. Imagine being stranded there and hearing the bow slowly break, the wood of the ship slowly crack around you. You can feel the ice pushing in like a vice on all sides. This is your only shelter. This is your only sanctuary. Certain death and cold and freezing conditions are outside. Your only warmth, your only safety is this boat, and it's slowly being broken up, like being held in an icy fist that's slowly crushing you. At this point, Shackleton's journey, the endurance expedition, takes a dramatic and unexpected turn. And we're going to get into that later. But right now, I want to take you back to JT, because his journey is just about to begin. And like all polar expeditions today, and like Shackleton himself, in order to get to Antarctica, you must first cross one of the most infamous sea passages on the planet, one of the most dangerous stretches of water on the planet, the Drake Passage.
So to get across to Antarctica from the bottom of South America, from Ushuaia, you have to cross the Drake Passage. And it's notorious as one of the roughest stretches of sea on the planet, because it's where three oceans meet. So you have the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Southern Oceans all fighting for supremacy, and it can get very, very nasty down there. It pretty much feels like, when you get it bad, when it's the Drake Shake max, it kind of feels like being inside a washing machine for 3 days permanently. A lot of people were very, very sick. It was a really rough experience, and the photographer that I was with was pretty sick as well. We were, during the course of the Drake, they prepare you for what's going to happen on Antarctica, so we were being fitted with our wetsuits and life jackets, and we were going to do hiking as well, so they were fitting us with boots and crampons. And while Mark, the photographer, was being fitted with crampons, and the expedition leader was kneeling in front of him strapping the crampons on, there was a violent Drake shake, and he managed to puke on the back of the head of the expedition leader, which didn't go down too well for the rest of the trip. And one night, I remember, we were having dinner in the small ship's galley restaurant type area, and they tied all the chairs and tables down with chains because the ocean was that violent, and they didn't want people flying across the room. And again, Mark, the photographer, had a glass of red wine, and there was a violent shake, and the glass of red wine ended up flying across the table and into the face of a stranger who was sitting just across the table. But he took it in good spirits. He kind of looked at us, licked his lips, and said, "Ah, Merlot."
I honestly don't know if I could handle it. I turn green if I lay out on a pool lilo too long. I get seasick thinking about being on a boat. Imagine it, 2 days, churning water, no land, huge waves, seas, just unrelenting seas.
We woke up and all of a sudden everything was still outside, and there were just these amazing white mountains just kind of glistening in the early morning light. Antarctica is a proper continent. It has these incredible mountain ranges, it has natural harbours, it has valleys, it has insane wildlife, and there we were. We were there. We were looking at the last continent, at the great white continent, at this place that people like Shackleton and Scott and Amundsen had been obsessed with reaching. And this, it was the space race of the early 20th century. And after reading so much about it and thinking so much about it for years, finally seeing it was quite humbling, really. It's an extraordinarily beautiful place.
The last continent. I like that. I like that description. It feels like that too. The last great untouched, wild place on Earth. A setting for incredible adventure. And JT's was just beginning. So
we were down in Antarctica itself, Antarctica proper, for 10 days. And the idea, the itinerary of this particular expedition was to explore the peninsula. So the peninsula is, if you think of Antarctica as this great white continent at the bottom of the map, the peninsula is like an arm, like a white arm that kind of reaches up as if it's trying to grab the tail of South America. And that's obviously the nearest point you can get to on continental Antarctica, and that's where we were. And that's where Shackleton was, of course, 100 years before. So we were exploring the peninsula. We were spending mornings kayaking. We were hiking out to penguin colonies. We did stand-up paddleboarding through a corridor of icebergs, which was insane to see the colours of the icebergs and the way the light refracts through them as penguins are shooting about like torpedoes and seals are looking at you curiously and then sliding into the water. It's so funny to see seals because they're obviously very cumbersome on land, very fat and sloth-like, and then as soon as they hit the water, it's so graceful and smooth and sleek. And yeah, the wildlife down there is different because they haven't had enough experience of man to know to be scared. And they're just curious, unafraid, and they're like, this is our place. Who are you? Who are these slightly taller penguins with brightly coloured Gore-Tex? They don't have any fear. And some of the wildlife encounters were some of the best parts of the trip, to be honest. There are lots of rules that you have to abide by down there. You have to be very conscious of the wildlife. We weren't allowed to get within 5 meters of any wildlife unless they came to us. If they came to us, we had to stand very still. And there was one moment I remember where a penguin did come right up to me and started pecking at my salopettes in a kind of friendly, curious manner, which was very cute until it managed to rip a hole in them. But it was nice to have made a friend. So we explored some of the penguin colonies. We went to some of the bases. We went to the British base, Port Lockroy, which was a fascinating experience. They're doing some interesting experiments there, and it was good to see the older part of the base, and they kept it intact from, I believe it was the 1930s they built it. And then there's a much more modern dome where the current incumbents stay. So that was really interesting. And then we went across to the Ukrainian base, which is called Vernadsky. And those guys were a little bit more crazy. They were more into making their own vodka and partying. And they had this crazy thing there where if you gave them a bra, they would give you a shot of vodka. And we thought they were just messing about until they showed us into this room which was full of bras just hanging from the ceiling. Perhaps a little creepy, but everyone seemed to take it in good spirits, especially after they tried the homemade vodka.
I love that comparison. I just have this sense of, the Brits busying themselves with data and cups of Earl Grey, and then the Ukrainians right next door playing rock music and homebrewing vodka and building a shrine to bras. Because of course, what else would you do if you were stuck in Antarctica? But there's also something that every polar explorer has to go through.
So one of the things we did down there was the polar plunge, the infamous polar plunge, which is mad, but it's a kind of rite of passage. And I think from the 90 odd people on the expedition cruise, maybe as many as 35, 40 of us did it. Basically, they anchor the ship, they find a nice solid piece of ice, they go out there and they chainsaw a hole in it. And then you walk down onto the ice in your boots and parka. You got your swimming trunks on underneath, and you line up. And one at a time, they wrap a rope around your waist. You take off your jacket and your boots, and you jump into the hole, into the freezing water underneath the Antarctic ice. And you're in there for 3 or 4 seconds, maybe, and then they yank you out with the rope.
Just as a frame of reference, you could jump in a lake. It would be maybe 50 degrees and really cold for that. You would be jumping out pretty quickly. The water in that polar plunge is just a fraction above freezing. You literally cannot jump in water colder than that. Now, as someone who likes to kind of dip my toes in the pool and wander around the outside. And if it's a little bit cool, I'll probably like to just heat up. I'm a bit of a cat, is what I'm saying, when it comes to pools and oceans and cold water. I like to lie out and get nice and hot before I jump in. I can't imagine standing on the edge of that hole in the ice, that black water underneath, with a rope tied around me and being told to jump in.
And it's quite a crazy feeling, actually. It's so cold that your mind doesn't register it for those few seconds. You don't really feel the bitter chill until you're out again. Afterwards, they give you a shot of schnapps, and then you basically run as fast as you can back up the gangplank and to your cabin to have a shower because you're freezing.
And speaking of freezing, let's bring it right back to Shackleton now, because Antarctica is one thing with a nice warm bed and cups of tea and stuff to go back to, but it is quite another thing when you are completely on your own.
One of the moments where I felt perhaps the closest to Shackleton and his expedition was when we did the cross-country skiing. When we were roped up and we were on skis and we were moving from point to point, and it was tough, you know. The weather was very kind to us on our trip. We had a lot of days where it was blue skies, and Antarctica just looked like this pristine alpine wonderland, and it was easy to fall in love with it. But then there were a couple of days when the weather came in and you realised what Shackleton and his men had to go through, because, you know, the weather came in on a couple of occasions and we got evacuated back to the ship in Zodiacs, and we could basically go back to a nice warm ship and have a cup of tea and a piece of cake, whereas Shackleton and his guys were out there properly. That really started to bring it all home to me quite a lot. When the weather came in, that's when I started to think, wow, it was serious.
And it was serious. As far as the endurance expedition goes, what happened next after they left their ship, after their ship had been crushed by the ice? Serious is a complete understatement. JT picks up the second half of the story now.
Shackleton and his team got off the ship and they started on foot towing the lifeboats with their supplies, with dogs, to try and get across to solid land before the ice melted. And so it became this battle against the elements and against time, because they had to get across while there was still ice for them to get across, and they had to get to an island before the sea ice broke up. So they wintered down there. They were down there in total for something like 18 months.
18 months on their own, on the ice in Antarctica. This is the coldest place on the planet. Literally, the coldest temperature ever recorded was in Antarctica, 135 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. That is a crazy temperature. That is closer to the surface temperature of Mars than it is anywhere else on the planet. It is literally like exploring an alien freezing world.
In the end, they got across to an island. They got across to Elephant Island, and Shackleton left the majority of his crew there, sheltering under the lifeboats, surviving on penguins and seals and the limited supplies they had, while he and 5 others took a tiny boat and navigated themselves all the way across to South Georgia, where they got to a whaling station, and there were Norwegians there who could help them with the rescue attempt. And even when they got to South Georgia, they landed on the wrong side of the island, and they were exhausted and starving and obviously suffering all kinds of different conditions from what they'd been through for months and months on end down there. And they still managed to hike over the mountains of South Georgia to get down to the whaling base on the other side. And apparently Shackleton opens the door to the whaling station, and obviously the whalers are terrified because they don't expect someone to just come knocking at the door. They're in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden this like stick-thin guy with a massive beard and mad eyes comes piling through the door and says, "I am Ernest Shackleton, who won the war." And you just imagine these Norwegian whalers just sitting there having their tea, and they're just like, "What the hell? Like, where did this guy come from?"
I love that. I absolutely love that. I'm Ernest Shackleton. Who's won the war? You can just picture that. That's so British and 19th century. I just absolutely love that.
Once they got over the absolute terror of this mad, bearded skeleton coming through the door demanding to know who won the war, they realised who he was and what had happened, and they quickly managed to get help and get the other guys rescued. And just that dramatic moment where he bursts through the door and asks who won the war is just always stuck with me.
They made it against all the odds. Shackleton and his crew managed to get help and managed to get a boat back to the place where the rest of his comrades, the rest of the crew, were still sheltering under those lifeboats. They'd been there for just about 3 months at that point. And he managed to get them back. You can just imagine the look on their faces when they saw Shackleton coming over the horizon on the bow of that ship, just triumphant, because against all the odds, not a single man died. Everyone came back despite spending nearly 2 years in that frozen wilderness all alone on the ice. They survived, and that's what makes it one of the greatest adventure stories of all time.
It was one of the great success stories of exploration, and even though essentially the whole mission was a failure, they didn't cross the Antarctica, but they did not achieve their goals. They didn't even get anywhere close to achieving their goals. The fact that Shackleton refused to give up, refused to let anyone fall, refused to leave anyone behind, giving his gloves to other people, giving his coat to other people, he was just more than a man. He got them out. That glorious defeat became probably more than if he'd managed to achieve getting across the Antarctic from one side to the other. So it's the greatest success from the jaws of defeat story, that I've ever come across in it. The drama and the human element, it's a fantastic story, and set against the backdrop of one of the most beautiful places on the planet.
So it's the end of Shackleton's heroic adventure story, the endurance story, and it ended with everyone safe. But JT wasn't finished yet. He had one very, very special experience yet, and it's something that almost no one gets to do. Only a handful of people ever go to Antarctica. It's a very hard place to get to. It's expensive to get to. But out of that handful, only a tiny, tiny fraction ever get to camp on the ice itself. And that truly is following in Shackleton's footsteps, because to sleep out on the ice, surrounded by that beautiful frozen wilderness of Antarctica on your own, is truly something unique and special.
I think it's fair to say that the highlight of the entire trip for me and most of the other people that I was down there with was the night we spent camping on the ice. And it was a very popular thing to do, but due to the laws down there, only a certain amount of people are allowed to stay on the ice per night. I think it was something maybe as little as 20. And so we were lucky, Mark and I, the photographer, were lucky to get a slot. And the rules were very strict. You're not allowed to leave anything behind at all, to the extent that there were complicated arrangements for going to the toilet even. And they chose a little bay, which was very calm. And we took tents, and we spent a good time kind of digging in. You dig what they call I think they called it a grave or a coffin. You dig a human-shaped or two human-shaped hole in the ice, and then you put the tent over the top of it. And then you have various mats, and then your kind of bivy bag to sleep in. And that whole experience was insane. We didn't really sleep much at all. And at that time of year, it doesn't really get dark. The sky kind of goes this kind of purple, sort of rosy pink, and then the sun squats very close to the horizon, and then it just starts to rise again. So it's never truly dark during the Antarctic summer, which runs from November to February. We were down there in December. And just that feeling, just that quiet, that pure quiet of being there, of lying on Antarctica, just like Shackleton and his guys had done 100 years before. That feeling that you're alone with the elements. You know, of course the ship is close by in case you need it, but we couldn't see it. It was, you know, it was a good 15, 20 minute Zodiac ride away. We were on our own in the elements. And it was an incredible feeling. You know, that's the closest that I felt to Shackleton and to the other great explorers that had literally crossed the same piece of land as we had. And of course it was a lot easier for us, but looking at the same mountains, all these mountains that just don't have names because nobody has climbed them. Looking at the same sky, looking at the same wildlife, you know, there were seals barking and there were penguins chattering, rummaging about to find pebbles to take back to their nests. It was just a really happy place, even though it was freezing cold. You know, we snuck a hip flask over there, and even that didn't really keep the cold at bay. We had 3 layers of gloves and balaclavas and all kinds of stuff, and it was so cold, but it was so beautiful. And I think looking back, not just on that trip, but on my entire career, that is one of the absolute standout highlights, that communing with what is probably the most beautiful, pristine place on Earth, which is an incredibly humbling and emotional and beautiful experience.
Communion. I love that word. Communion. That's what it is. It's moments of true connection, and that's why we go. This may be one of the last frontiers on the planet, a true wilderness untouched by humankind. But its silence and cold beauty is something that calls to us, it speaks to us too. But it's also a fragile wilderness.
Obviously, there's a very real threat to Antarctica from climate change, and it's happening fast. Big pieces of ice are coming off and floating away and melting, and 30 years down the line, I dread to think what it's going to be like. I mean, it's certainly not going to look like this white, perfect wonderland that it does now and it did in Shackleton's day. It's scary to think what might happen to this last great wilderness, and I just feel incredibly lucky that I got to see it the same way that Shackleton did, because however distant the relation was, you know, my great-great-grandfather, if my great-great-grandson was to go to Antarctica, we would see an entirely different place, and I suspect it wouldn't be for the better.
That's just a beautiful way to end this story. Thank you so much, JT. Thank you for telling us that story. Thank you for taking us with you to Antarctica. It's been an incredible adventure. At JT Travels if you want to find out more about him. The original music and compositions today were done by a very good friend, my brother, Alistair Nisbet. He's an incredible musician, one of the most amazing musicians I've ever known. If you want to find out more about him and his music, please check the show notes. I'm going to provide links and details, or you can check out the website too, armchair-explorer.com, where we'll have some details up about Ali's music, but we're also going to have details about this trip, more pictures from Shackleton, and how you can get there and do this adventure yourself. If you had fun today, please subscribe to the show. Please share and tell your friends about it. We're trying to build a community of people who love exploring, who love adventure, who love the outdoors, and who want to celebrate this world, this amazing, beautiful planet, by trying to see every single inch of it. I'm Aaron Miller. It's been awesome hanging out with you. It's been awesome going on this adventure with you. I'll see you again soon.
Quick question. Do you want travel tips from people who have actually been there?
Our show is co-hosted by Tim Johnson, an award-winning travel journalist who's been to more than 145 countries around the world. And I'm David Brody, the other co-host who's been travel podcasting for 20 years while traveling to 50-plus countries around the world.
In about 10 or 20 minutes per show, we break down a destination with the kind of insight you usually only get from long guidebooks or hours of research.
So if you want expert advice, zero fluff, and travel inspiration that you can actually use, search for Travel in 10 wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can also find us at boyescape.com.
Hi, I'm Pauline Fromer, host of the Fromer's Travel Podcast. We post new episodes weekly, detailing the kinds of money-saving tips and cultural insights that will make your trips richer without making you significantly poorer. We do so by interviewing real travel experts like TV host Samantha Brown, Fromer's authors from around the globe, and such public figures as Free Solo's Alex Honnold. It's a fun travel party. I hope you can join us.